Welcome to Mainstream Media, this week's edition of Mainstream, and with Paul Elam. Say hello, Paul.
Hello, everybody. Good to
and
be
Warren.
here.
Hello.
It's good to have everybody here tonight. We're going to be talking about the importance of having both parents tonight, and with a special emphasis on fathers and how important they are. And I cannot think of anyone who's a better expert on that kind of information than Warren Farrell. So, Warren, maybe you could get us started tonight.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's really important to say that when children are raised, what we now know all over the world is that they do best when they have both parents involved. And this is sort of an assumption of the intact family. And we were critical of the family for a while, but we really found that the family, the intact family, usually via marriage, really leads to the best outcomes for children. But in the non-intact family, and we have to just get a frame for that, last year 53% of women under 30 who had children without being married. And that means usually, predictably, that the father is either very minimally involved or he is hierarchically involved. By hierarchically involved, what I mean is that the father is involved if the mother feels that he is a father in the way that she feels a father should father. And so that hierarchical involvement means that the father is, if he maybe brings the child out to do things like take risks in climbing rocks or climbing a mountain or climbing a tree, or to play a sport that is more like be roughhousing with the child, that the mother will be able to say, should she feel that way, don't roughhouse, don't climb that tree, and feel that the father maybe does not bring enough safety to the child. And it's often true that the father doesn't bring enough safety to the child, and that's one of the reasons why it's important for both mothers and fathers to be in the equation. Mothers usually overprotect, fathers often forget to sort of create enough safety, although usually, interestingly, when fathers are fathering alone, they create more safety because they tend not to be dependent upon the woman for that. They also create more nurturance when they're fathering alone than they do when they're fathering with a mother, because oftentimes they leave the nurturing up to the mom. So, but what we know is that in this non-intact family, in the 53% of families where children are raised primarily by moms when they are born out of wedlock, or in the large number of families in which there is a divorce, we know that when there's 4 things that can happen that lead to children who are raised in non-intact families doing as well as they do in intact families. One is that there be about an equal amount of involvement of both the father and the mother. So it's just as important to not leave the mother out of the equation as it is to not leave the father out of the equation. Secondly, that the mother and father live close enough to each other so that there doesn't need to be, the child doesn't need to resent going to the other parent's home and missing sports and celebrations of their best friends, and therefore become alienated from their friends or distant from their friends or not involved in sports. Sports is a crucial involvement for children, especially boys and girls, but because boys have more ADHD problems that are helped by physical activity, even more important for boys. And third, that the child is not able to detect any bad mouthing from mom to dad or dad to mom. And when I say bad mouthing, that's a sort of broad statement for eye contact that's negative. So since we're doing something visual here, if the child says something about, Daddy took me to a wonderful park last weekend, and the mom goes, mm-hmm, and just gives that sort of negative, distant, I really don't want to hear any more about it vibe, that's a type of bad mouth. The child learns that she or he can't express their feelings of joy with the dad, and conversely, if the father does that with the mother, about the mother, that's just as bad, obviously. And fourth, that if there's a non-intact family, the most recent work by Kyle Pruitt and the Cohens at Berkeley and Kyle Pruitt at Yale, has found that children do best when the father and the mother in a non-intact family are doing counseling that is consistent, that is not that is not dependent upon an emergency to stimulate the counseling. So if you have those 4 conditions, the children do so well. But the important thing, one of the things that very few people know is, what do fathers do that's different than what mothers do, and why is that so effective? And this is important because fathers don't know what they do and what its effectiveness is. They sometimes know generally what they do, but they don't know the connection between housing and developing social skills. They don't know the connection between boundary enforcement and developing empathy. They don't know why the children who grow up father involvement do so much better in every academic subject. They just do so much better in all physical health areas, do so much better in the in social skills, not only empathy, but being able to develop friends and keep friends and being liked by friends, but also being able to stand up and have boundaries with their friends. And fourth, they are much more likely to do well psychologically, to be much less likely to be depressed, to be much less likely to have symptoms of psychological problems like drinking problems or drug problems or depression problems. They're much less likely on the extreme end to be suicidal, and much less likely on the extreme end to be homicidal. But the huge finding is that the living at homes without dads is more correlated to the possibility of using drugs than any other single factor. The fact more important than poverty, more important than any socioeconomic variable, is the lack of significant father involvement. And this is not, I believe, when I was doing the research for Father and Child Reunion, which is where I learned all this, when I was doing the research for Father and Child Reunion, I was really hoping that I would find that stepfathers, because I was a stepfather, would be just as valuable as biological dads. And I was looking for research, probably with a little bit of bias, to come to that conclusion. And I couldn't find the research that significantly substantiated that. There seems to be something in a child that needs to have a sense of, who am I? And who am I is half the genes of the mother and half the genes of the father. And the child doesn't seem to know that, as we see with adopted children. Very often adoptive parents are wonderful parents and they care a huge amount, but somewhere in the preteens usually, the child starts feeling like she or he doesn't know herself or himself, and they start wanting to go on a search for the biological parents. What we see the same with the stepdad is that the stepdad may be loving and good, but the child needs to know who she is or who he is, and who she is and who he is half the genes of the mother and half the genes of the father. I remember I have two stepdaughters, and I remember speaking in Australia and coming back from Australia, and this fellow said, could I have, I'm coming from Australia to the United States, can I meet with you? And we invited her with my wife and I and our children. And when he was there, he was saying, we were asking him about, tell us about where you live, and he said, I live on a ranch. And he said, I said, well, what's it like living on a ranch? And he said, well, it's really fascinating. And I think the most fascinating thing was that we had about a dozen ducks, and they lost their parents. And amazingly, a chicken took over the nurturing of these ducks and brought the 12 ducks to the point where the mother was ready to take the ducks out of the barn. And so on our property we had a lake, and the chicken sort of guided the ducks all the way down the side of the hill. And then when it got to the lake, the chicken started getting in front of between the ducks and the lake to make sure the ducks didn't go in the lake. But the ducks just went right around the chicken and just all jumped into the lake, and the mother chicken was just going berserk, and just all over the place. And my stepdaughter said, that's the one that's adopted. The adopted stepdaughter said, that's the way I feel. I feel like I am a duck being brought up by a chicken. And as loving and wonderful as my wife is, and her adopted mom is, and her adoptive dad was, She was in search of who she was. And that's what happens when the biological father or the biological mother is taken from the child, particularly if there's a divorce, and particularly if the child feels like the father disappears or she or he can't see the father. That's when it hurts the most, and because the child feels in some way, why doesn't daddy want to see me? What is wrong with me? Who am I? And if the father's being bad-mouthed, the child starts feeling like, well, whatever's being said badly about the dad, like he's irresponsible, he's a liar, whatever, the child starts looking in the mirror and seeing the eyes or the hair or the cheeks of the dad, and starts wondering, well, I lied last week to so-and-so. Maybe I'm inherently a liar like my dad. Or if my father's drunk, maybe, or I hear that my father's a drinker, maybe that's a problem as well. One of the reasons that I think Barack Obama did so well, despite the lack of a dad immediately present, is because the mother filled Barack Obama's ears with stories about how extraordinary and how wonderful and how much of a hero his dad was. And my guess is that he took that with him and made that a part of his story as to the fact that he was a good person also. So the bad mouthing is really crucial. The things like the roughhousing are so important because children get a sense of when the father is roughhousing with the child, and sometimes the father pushes too far, the child learns with the safety of the father to say that's too much. So it learns to set boundaries, but also the father sets good boundaries usually and says if you poke me or pull my hair or whatever, I'm going to stop you and we're not going to do any more roughhousing tonight. And the father, if the poking or the pulling or the cheating continues, the father says, okay, that's the end of roughhousing for tonight. And the child might whine and say, well, and the father will often go, well, if you whine, that's okay too, but there'll be no roughhousing tomorrow night either. So the child begins to pick up the point that if it whines and complains, it doesn't win, and if it violates regulations of things that are fair, it also doesn't win. So it begins to develop a sense of, I have to think of someone else's needs besides my own needs. And that's the beginning of empathy. So in studies all over the world, the more the father is involved with the children, the more likely the child is to display empathy. The more empathetic the child is, obviously, the more likely other children will like that child. So the more its social skills become enhanced. And the more social skills are enhanced, the less likely a child is to be depressed. And so you get a little bit of a sense of the cycle of involvement. The more, and the other big issue that fathers contribute in a major way is boundary enforcement. And so if a mother and father after divorce, for example, they're very likely to say pretty much the same thing to the child. Sweetie, you can't have your vegetables until you finish your ice cream. I mean, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your vegetables.
Say, that sounds like a deal.
I like that parent.
The first time.
That's the child's fantasy, right? The great child's book. And so the child will do the same thing with both parents. It will test the boundaries to see if it can get away with having the ice cream without eating all the vegetables. And the mother will usually sense that, in a divorce situation, the mother will often be very sensitive to the child. Maybe the child's a little bit down, had a difficult day. These are my few precious moments with the child, so why am I going to get into an argument when the child says, I've had a few peas, can I have my ice cream now? The mother thinks that, for the sake of a few peas, I'm not going to get into a big argument about it. Okay, you've had a few peas, thank you for trying, and now you can have your ice cream. The dad is much more likely to say, excuse me, we had a deal here. The deal was that you couldn't have your ice cream until you finished your peas. When you finish your peas, you can have your ice cream. Oh, you're so mean, Daddy. Mom lets me have my peas, before I finish the ice cream. And the child goes, and the dad goes, that's fine. That's what you do at Mom's house. But at Dad's house, you can't have your peas until you finish your ice cream. I like Mom a lot better than you. Well, you won't have any ice cream. You can continue complaining, but there'll be no ice cream tomorrow night either. And then the child finally learns that it has to attend to finishing the vegetables before it has its ice cream. So what the child is learning with the dad is it has no choice but to do postponed gratification. That is, to get what it wants, the ice cream, it has to do what it has to do. And that is postponed gratification, and that skill development, that skill set of postponed gratification is the single most important stepping stone to academic success and to success in life. We know this from the marshmallow experiment years ago at Stanford, but it's been shown in dozens of different ways. And we also see this reflected indirectly in the ADHD gap between children raised primarily by dads and children raised primarily by moms. Children raised primarily by dads are only half as likely to have ADHD as children raised primarily by moms. Now, a certain amount of ADHD appears to be somewhat genetic, but genes get triggered by environment. And so one of the things that seems to trigger, so if we observe what I just talked about the vegetables and the ice cream, one of the things that happens there is that the child is learning with the dad's boundary enforcement that it has no option but to attend to pay attention to the task of finishing the vegetables before it gets the ice cream. So it can't develop attention deficit by hopping to try to manipulate a better deal of having a little bit of ice cream, or trying to get a better deal by appealing to the fact that it maybe was depressed, or a child was critical of it or bullied him or her in school today, and so therefore, can I have my ice cream? And the mother feels badly, and her heart goes out and says, okay, you can have the ice cream sooner. And so, or I really miss dad, can I have the ice cream? So children learn to manipulate much more effectively with dad. So being with a mom is a good preparation for being an attorney, but being with the dad is very good preparation for learning how to not have attention deficit, but have attention focus in order to get what you want. So those are a few of the types of things that I say to dads. Dads, you can't expect moms to know this unless you do your homework, unless you do your reading, and you find out not just the outcome of what leads that children do so much better when there's father involvement, but you have to be able to explain in a loving way to the mom what you contribute and why you contribute and why you're doing what you do. And that way the mother knows you're a conscious dad, you're a mindful dad, you're a caring dad, and you're an effective dad. And that makes it a lot more likely that the mother will want you to stay involved.
Yeah, that's interesting, Warren. And basically, what I'm hearing you say is that the father both pushes the limits and also sets the limits.
Yes, exactly. And also hears the limits, the roughhousing and things like that, puts the child in a position to also say, Dad, don't do this anymore. And that teaches the child how, when she or he is in a sort of situation where they're being pressured by kids, like maybe a child's being pressured by other children to jump off a rock into a stream, and the child's really afraid to do that. When it doesn't have practice at saying, no, I don't want to do that, then it's oftentimes afraid, and it's vulnerable to being called chicken, or you a girl, or something along those lines that that many boys feel that means that you weren't willing to take the risks, and therefore you're not really able to play the role that we expect men to play, which is to risk our lives in order to save the family.
It's amazing how many factors are involved in father absence. And in reading Father and Child Reunion, one of the ones that struck me was IQ. The fact that people's IQ is enhanced by having fathers present.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
It's the risk-taking mostly, and also the and there's two areas where that's found. Let's deal with the risk-taking area first. So, for example, the normal dynamic between a mom and dad is that the child will say, "Can I climb a tree?" And in an intact family, what happens oftentimes is that mom says, "Well, sweetie, you're a little young now, but in a few years, maybe yes." And the dad goes, "Yeah, let him climb the tree, or her climb the tree. It's it'll be okay." And the mom goes, "Yeah, and what happens if she or he falls out of the tree and breaks, gets a concussion or whatever?" And the dad goes, "Well, maybe I'll tell you what, I'll go out and on the tree." And the mom goes, "Yeah, you'll go out with your cell phone, and you'll pay more attention to the cell phone than Mary or Joe." And the argument goes back and forth, and finally there's an agreement. And the agreement is something like, put the cell phone down, pay attention to the child, and no climbing beyond this point, and not these branches, they're weak, and the father goes out, with those caveats. But what the child gets from that is the child gets risk-taking beyond what it would normally be allowed to do with the mom alone, but it gets protection beyond what it may be inclined to get without the mom's input. And so, but what we found out from risk-taking is that as the child learns to sort of assess what branches are safe and what aren't, and what risk to take and what not, that neurons in the brain start connecting and firing in ways across synapses that do not happen, and the brain starts growing and developing more fertily, and IQ increases. And so this is an example of, but I know no father that knows this. So fathers don't tell moms this, and so moms just think it's recklessness on the part of dad that's involved here. We find the same thing with infant development. When a child is actually born prematurely and is in the hospital, the nurturance of the father and the mother together in the hospital, whatever the dynamic is, we don't know. But when that child is born prematurely and then comes with father involvement, the child is released from the hospital significantly more quickly and has better psychomotor functioning than it does when there's not a father involved. And the psychomotor functioning is also correlated with the development of high intelligence at an early age.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that one of the things that we need to realize, too, is that there are probably things going on that we just don't know about. The presence of both parents is just so critical, and we don't know it yet. Yes. But it's obvious from the research that children do better with both parents. I think one of the things I remember from your book, Warren, was the whole idea of when you have both parents, there's this give and take. There's this back and forth. There's this struggle between the mom and the dad, which really helps the kids in the long run. Without that struggle, you only get one side. With the struggle, you got both.
That's so important, Tom, because I know when a lot of mothers and fathers are arguing, they say, we are just going to get a divorce. We obviously can't bring up the children. We don't want the children to see our fights. And so it's probably better off that the children not even be in the same home with both of us. But in fact, when children see parents argue within reason and settle the arguments and make compromises, children get a very good example of how compromising occurs and that an argument doesn't mean the end of a marriage. And what they get is the checks and balances of both the mom's propensity for safety and nurturing and sensitivity, and the dad's propensity for encouragement to try things that the mom would not be okay necessarily with the child trying. We see this a great deal in school. For example, the child might have its first teacher that it doesn't like in kindergarten or first grade, and mom will say, sweetie, okay, I really don't want you to be with Mrs. Whoever you call it, and I'll go in and talk to the principal and get you put in a different classroom if that's a viable situation. And the dad goes, no, I think it's really important. In life you can't have everybody that you want to have as a boss. And so you've got to deal with what you get in life and learn how to adapt and deal with it. And mom will go, just not, the first year of school is so important, or the fourth year of school is so important, or this is 10th grade, which is crucial. And the dad will tend to go, no, the social lesson is more important. And who is right? Both are right to a degree. And it's the tension between both the mom and the dad that often leads to win-win solutions. But if the mom and dad see their argument as an example of why they are bad parents and why they need to be divorced, as opposed to why they are good parents and doing a certain amount of arguing within reason and not having that escalate to name-calling or destructive arguing or physical hitting of each other, then that is helpful for the child to see resolution, and see that it often gets the benefit of that. But parents have to know the value of checks and balances, just like as I said in father and child reunion that we have to, most Republicans hate Democrats and strong Democrats hate Republicans, and we think the world would be better without the other party. But in fact, on some level, we know that we're all a lot better off having the checks and balances of the other party and of the other houses of Congress, etc.
Yes. Paul, what are you thinking?
Well, I was sitting here listening, and one of the things that occurred to me, one, just a reminder that the importance of fathers. We're doing a whole line of these right now, talking about what we perceive to be the top 10 issues in the lives of men and boys, and I don't think it's even remotely deniable that the importance of fathers in the lives of children and the importance of parents working together to raise children is phenomenally important to the lives of both boys and girls. And it's important to the fathers, too, because there is rewards for them in that. But I was thinking as Warren was talking about nurturing, and I was thinking back to the 80s. I remember watching an old VHS video of Robert Bly talking about that subject. Robert Bly's a poet. He was part of the mythopoetic movement that men experienced in the 80s and 90s. And he was talking about the nurturing in teaching that fathers provide. And when I heard him talk about this, he explained, he says, even very stern, bitter, not so nice men can often be very, very excellent fathers to their children when it comes to teaching. That you say a father has carpentry skills and he shows the child, you put one board here and you do this and you cut it like that, and it becomes sort of a closeness between the father and child as this lesson is being executed, a kind of nurturing. And I remembered back at that time being about 12 years old, and our car was in the driveway and it had a flat tire. And my father said, "Come here." My father was a very stern man, a veteran of 2 wars, really kind of a rough guy. But he was like, "Come here, and I want to show you how to do this." And he showed me, here's where you put the jack stand, and you stand away from it, stand to the side, don't stand in front of it in case it slips, it won't hit you. And he showed me how to take the lug nuts off and do all these things. And for me, that was nurturing. It really was. It was a lesson that bonded me to my father. That and after that, if we had a flat tire, I could say, I know how to change it, and I could please my father with that and feel accomplished myself. And I think those kind of lessons from fathers are huge to the identity of children. I'm wondering, Warren, if you think that sometimes maybe we don't sell fathers a little short on the idea of their value as nurturers in that respect.
Totally. I think men and women have, and I really, in Father and Child Reunion, one of the things I really say very strongly is men and women just have different ways of nurturing, and both are nurturance. And you gave a wonderful example of that. And certainly my dad would oftentimes, be very, he was born in 1910. And so by the age of 35, he'd been through, 2 world wars and a depression had passed. And so from his perspective, being critical of me was his way of nurturing, because the life that he saw was that if there was any Achilles heel that you had, that you were going to have a chance of being sunk by the depression or sunk by a war or so on. And so you had to be very cognizant of being good at everything that could potentially defeat you. And so I got a lot of criticism, but I also felt the love of that criticism because he was attending to me, and he was, paying attention to me. If it was like if I started my paper route a little bit late, it was like, people appreciate getting a paper early and on time. So make sure that alarm is set. I set the alarm, Dad, but it didn't go off. I set the alarm, Dad, but I shut it off and I don't. That's no excuse. Set a second alarm. I set the second alarm and I shut that off too, then put it farther away. There was never an excuse with my dad. But I interpreted that as a form of nurturing. And he let me know enough about that. He didn't say it directly, but I sort of saw that as a result of him doing that, I often was able to accomplish tasks and do things that sometimes some of my peers could do and some of my peers couldn't do, but it helped me to feel more able to be, it helped me feel more competent in life than it otherwise would have been. And so oftentimes when a child will try something, like it will, go down a ski slope, and the child will fall, and the father will say, well, get up and try again. But sometimes that child just has a need to cry, and so fathers sometimes need to learn that they need to be able to hold that child and let the child cry for a while. And sometimes when the father doesn't know that, the child rushes to the mother to get that holding, that nurturing, and so on. Fathers need to know, and many fathers do know when the mother isn't around, that the child needs that, but fathers tend to err in the direction of get up and try again a little bit too quickly. And part of what dads, can learn from moms is that there's no contradiction between nurturing the child for a while, holding the child for a while, letting the child cry for a while, and then having done that, by building the emotional base and security back up again, going out and saying, now try again. And there's no contradiction between trying again and taking the hand the first time and weaning the child back to where it was on the ski slope before. And so when mothers and fathers listen to each other, these are the great gifts they give each other. Not giving up, not dropping out of school, not dropping out of a subject that's hard, and doing things, receiving criticism, because one of the things that I've certainly discovered in the process of teaching couples communication is that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism from a loved one, especially when given badly. And basically, we perceive all criticism from a loved one as that which is given badly. And so it's very important to be able to handle the criticism. And if a child does not get that from a parent to a certain degree, then the child will be unprepared for it from kids at school, and the vulnerability to it will attract bullies to that child, who will see that it can really upset and throw the child off guard by teasing it and bullying it. And so one of the correlations between lots of father involvement is two things: less likely to be bullied, less likely to be a bully. And so, I hope that example of being able to handle the criticism that a dad is more likely to give, and learning how to handle that as constructive and a form of nurturance, is important. I think the other issue is in this day and age, it used to be in the old days that children were, if you will, boys in particular, we learned that we could be loved and respected and admired by going to war, by being disposable in war, being disposable in work. But now that disposability in war and work is less. War disposes of fewer boys, and being a sole breadwinner is no longer an identifier for a male. And so boys in the future are far more likely to be dads, and be dads full time. And so, I remember this this line by Paul Simon, who will be my role model now that my role model is gone? And when a father is gone, the boy looks to, what am I to be? If I'm not able to identify myself fully as a sole breadwinner, and I can't go to war and be a guy, what am I? And if I want to be a dad, part-time or half-time or primary parent, how does that work? Without a role model as a dad, or seeing a dad sell product X or Y, but not be satisfied with what his life is about, having given up his dream maybe of being an artist or a writer or a musician or whatever it might have been the dad's dream, is not very enticing for a bright boy. So a bright, sensitive boy looks very frequently at the dad and sees the dad unhappy, maybe the dad having struggled being a father for a number of years, and then seeing the dad in an apartment and unable to even see the children. That doesn't look like a very enticing future for a bright boy who can see that and doesn't just follow instructions like a less to just do whatever he's told to do. And so you have among a lot of boys today a failure to launch. And one of the reasons I think for the failure to launch among bright boys is feeling like, I look around me and I see adult men, but I don't see a lot of role models that I really aspire to. And so what is there for me? And so I think that's another crucial dimension of father involvement, is the importance of being a role model to your son and being for your daughter a sense, a man that she can trust, that isn't sexual, that can be close, that can sit on her lap, that she can sit on his lap, and there's no sexuality involved. That trust on the part of girls leads to teenage girls who have father involvement being far less likely to get pregnant out of wedlock, also being far less likely to have sex too quickly, and or being the opposite of that, being afraid of being sexual when they are, because they're never ready to be close to a male, because they don't know how to be close to a male. And so those are some, I think, dimensions of that. Long answer to a very good question.
An interesting
I wanted a follow-up to that, Warren. I agree with you, the importance of role modeling, that the ability to accept criticism from somebody you love.
Yes.
But what about when they're always wrong?
That only happens in 0.11% of people, and you are part of that, Paul.
It's my burden to bear.
Yes, exactly right.
Oh, me. You know, Warren, I'm very convinced that we have a huge understanding now that fathers are really, really important. But at the same time, I mean, the research shows that, your books show that, so many people who are MHRM know that, but we don't do anything about it. It's like the same thing, the same frustration I feel when I think about men who suicide, 8 out of 10, you know, or the male victims of domestic violence, or the just about any other men's issue you can think of. We've got the data out there, but there's no traction.
Absolutely.
Care.
You and I were on a call together last week, or earlier this week actually, about creating a White House Council on Boys and Men, and one of the comments that came up as a consensus on that group that was forming this, or trying to form this White House Council on Boys and Men, was the point that the most potent force in this country is for the issues that we're talking about is mothers of boys. And there's groups like MOB, M-O-B, Mothers of Boys, and MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers, which means about 60% of those will be mothers of boys as well, since many preschoolers are more than one in a family. And so, and mothers who have sons, that when mothers speak up, legislators on the right listen and legislators on the left listen, because legislators on the right are super scared about losing more of the female vote, and voters on the left mothers on the left are powerful for legislators on the left, because they are scared of losing the female vote also. With 7 million more women voting than men, combined with the fear of losing that vote, there is an enormous amount of power in mothers. Now, the power in mothers is that when a mother hears when a woman hears a guy like you, me, or Paul talk about a fear of taking sexual initiative, the only thing an adult woman can think about is the time that a man took sexual initiatives too quickly with her and inappropriately with her and didn't pay attention to her nose. But when she hears her son reach out and say, I want to call Kristen, and Kristen is really attractive, and I know she won't be responsive to me, and the mother is far more likely to hear see the pain of his fear of being rejected and encourage him to make the phone call. And if he said, gee, I did this a little bit too quickly with Kristen because I didn't know what else to do, she sees his vulnerability behind his moving too quickly. And so that's where the future, that is what we need to understand, is that a huge political force to work toward issues that will be helpful to boys and men is in mothers who are able to see in their sons the need for fairness, the need for nurturance that that allows their son's sensitivities and vulnerabilities to be paid attention to. Because when a mother has a son, she sees vulnerability where when a woman hears a man talk, she sees things that are just an outgrowth of a strong man, and if he's whining, that just turns her off.
Yes, I agree with you, and I also agree that women are a powerful force when it comes to change with something like this. But what leaves me furious is that people won't listen to men.
Yes.
You know, they just won't listen, nor do they care.
Let me interject something in that too. I mean, I share the frustration of men not being listened to. I certainly do. But I think that's something else that is even more frustrating for me. Is that, again, just like you pointed out, Tom, we do have, it's not just Warren's book, but his book is a super source for all this information condensed into one place. But the research is out there. We know that children need both parents. I think the cutoff time that I've heard most commonly quoted is that at least 35% of time to be with either parent, that is a minimum spot to start at, and that you try to reach for close to 50 from there, knowing that 50% is not always attainable, but that the goal is to at least get over 35. We know all this, and Warren's absolutely correct too, that women are the most powerful voting force in the American public, and women are being short-sighted about this issue. They will respond, I agree, when you talk to women about their sons. They will respond about their sons. And certainly not to women who have a son in a family court, who's having his children taken away and being reduced to a visitor 12, 13, 14% of the child's life. You will see that mother upset at what's going on. And also that is very much cutting into her access to her grandchild. Mm-hmm. But what we don't have in any significant force or level here are concerned women in this society that do have a strong political voice, that are creating political pressure to really bring about some rather radical change in the corruption in the family courts. And I want to try to segue this into something else, because I want to go back to something. I just don't want to let it go about something about Warren said that I think is so critically important about the roles of fathers in nurturing, and where men do have something that's very important to learn, which would help ameliorate in the long term, I believe, this problem. When are able to become a part of the emotional nurturing of their children. You see what happens to particularly, I think, to boys, and that's where we're focused on, so I'm just going to say boys for a moment. When they are driven to place all their emotional eggs in one basket, when they have one source for emotional comfort and relief, and one source for emotional safety from the time they're born, in being in the mother, and she becomes a designated place where he can cry, where he can express himself, where he can receive closeness and nurturing for his emotional condition, then he will grow up, I believe, to put all of his emotional eggs in the basket of women. And he will learn to see men from that experience as a place you don't go with your problems. You don't take your pain there. You don't do anything like that. So I think that is one area Warren has just smashed the nail on the head there. And I try. I think fathers get enough criticism as it is. So I try not to levy a bunch of criticism against fathers in this culture, because they've got it hard right now. Mm-hmm. But I think there's something critically important to what Warren is saying here, that if we start raising our boys, not encouraging them not encouraging men to become mothers, but to have a semblance of emotional access to their children, and a relationship that establishes emotional safety for that child, as well as physical safety, as well as teaching limits, as well as all the other valuable things that fathers give. then I believe we'll raise men who don't go crazy at loss when it comes to women, who learn how to develop relationships that support them through life, and maybe we'll have a lower suicide statistic going through divorces in families, and maybe we will have guys willing to make better selections of women in their lives too, because what men tend to do is take who will accept them if they're attracted to them. I mean, that's in all fairness to men, what they tend to do is decide if they're attracted to a woman, and if they are, then they begin to rationalize why she's right. And there is very little objective measurement of her character, of what her beliefs are, whether or not that she would be a good mother, whether or not that she would really be a good wife. It's just fundamentally, does she make your hormones stir? And if she does, then you start competing to get her attention and to get her approval and to get her love. And I think a lot of that comes because there is an absence of emotional connection to fathers that very much needs to be there, that will help boys discipline themselves when it comes to girls. And it's no wonder, because what do we see when we raise boys without this strong emotional connection to their fathers? We see many homes where the rule of law is if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. We do see a lot of homes where the mother is a dominant abusive force in the home, and she becomes a dominant abusive force after the divorce, and the parental alienation thing comes up and everything else. But Warren addressed that, and I wanted to come back to it, because I really do think that there is a need for men to start to really recognize the value of their emotional connections to their son, and in creating emotional safety with their sons, which men are not normally raised to learn how to do. That this is something relatively new, but I think it's like really important.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that, but I also think that men intuitively know this, and they do it automatically. You know, they do it without thinking a lot of times. It's like the whole thing about throwing the kid up in the air. But
you know, Tom, I don't know about that. I mean, I think men do intuit a lot about parenting that most people would never give them credit for. I really do. But, you know, and it may be a generational thing. But I know in my upbringing, you didn't cry around my father. He would give you a reason to cry about. You didn't express pain around him. It was okay around my mom. But it wasn't so much around him. You would learn lessons from him. You'd get disciplined. But I'm not so sure that men intuit this quite that much. And that's not.
I think we're coming from a different point of view. Very nurturing, you know. So I grew up in a home where the father was probably just as nurturing as the mother in some ways. So we have a different experience.
Yeah. And so now I'm wondering, and maybe Warren can give some insight on this, because it is an important subject of what the norms are. Here we have Tom, who was raised with a father that was equally nurturing to the mother, and here I was in what I felt like was a more traditional mindset, where the father was the authoritarian, he was the military, and the mother was the one who provided the nurturing, and their job descriptions did not overlap. So
yeah, among younger men, there's definitely a generation difference, and younger men who are involved with as fathers with their children are much more likely to be nurturing and comforting, and there's still a gap there between the father and the mother. That is, the father will will take many more risks of the child and be and okay with the child crying. Interestingly, sometimes the crying thing is a little bit of a reverse of what we're talking about. The father allowing a child who's hurt to cry without necessarily going up and saying, "Don't cry," is basically a way of the father saying, you know, crying is not your way out of doing any more of this. Like if you're skiing or horseback riding and you cry after you fall, it's sort of like you can cry, but still get back on that horse again afterwards. And so I see this in a lot of and I certainly see a lot more latitude among fathers that a lot of the work that I do is going around to observe fathers who are raising children and write up observations about them in preparation for expert witness testimony in court. And I'm amazed at how at least the fathers that I see are both good at encouraging their child and having them take risks, but also letting them do a certain amount of crying without putting them down. But there is a much shorter amount of time span that the father will be okay with the child crying before he says, okay, and back in the saddle again, let's go. Whereas the mother will give a lot longer time span for that, and as a rule. But the type of father that wants to be involved with the children is much more likely to do that. Now, the type of father that's out of the military and is coming home from tours of duty and is seeing a very much smaller amount of the child, the discipline that he feels the boy child in particular needs to be prepared for, that's a different modeling that he has. He hasn't oftentimes had so much opportunity. But it is amazing to me how much connection that when a father gets involved with a boy child or a girl child, what many people don't know is that his brain changes. That is, there's an entire set of neurons that's almost like a bed in a male brain, that when he becomes attached to a boy child or a girl child or an infant, that the same type of oxytocin, the same type of brain changes that occur in a woman after she has a child occur in a man. It takes slightly longer for them to occur, but it's only a matter of weeks longer before a male brain becomes very much like a female brain when a father is actively engaged and involved in the raising of a child process. When he isn't, that brain does not change. And so we have a self-fulfilling prophecy here. You keep fathers away from children, and they're not likely to develop some of that same type of capacity that mothers have. You get fathers involved with children, and you have much more likely development of that. So if a mom wants a father to be more engaged, nurturing, have that oxytocin that she has, keep him more involved. Don't say, oh, he's not like I am, get him less involved.
Yes, indeed. And we know now that when a woman becomes pregnant, the man, the father, his testosterone starts dropping.
Yes,
just because she's pregnant.
Yep.
And of course, with less testosterone, there's less striving for status and more likelihood of nurturance.
Yes.
And the man's testosterone then slows down at a much slower rate than before. And so it creates an environment where he can be more nurturing, you know?
Yeah, and there's physiological changes in women during pregnancy. The hue of the skin and even the pheromones that are produced from women are much more triggering to the protective instinct in men than when she is not pregnant. And this continues after childbirth. So there is a human drive to connect the parents around children that's just absolutely scientifically undeniable.
It's fascinating, and there's probably a lot more we don't know yet, you know?
Oh, I really agree with that. Anyone, by the way, who wants to sort of, beyond father and child reunion, let me also refer the listener here or the viewer here to the whole series on Through the Wormhole and Beyond the Wormhole that Morgan Freeman narrates. That is, if you want to see how much we know and also how much we don't know, and what particulate physics is discovering about brains, about the passing on of genes, about the triggering of genes, about the neuron connections, about the things that are activated and not activated. But when a boy or girl is born, what happens to the effect of the child that is born on the sister or the brother through the changes that happen inside the mother, the things that we thought were sort of sealed off like a wound from the rest of and there's a barrier to the rest of a blood barrier that we thought that was there, that is not there. I mean, there's a barrier, but it's porous, and there's so many dimensions of learning and growth that just your mind is blown by by what we know and what we don't know.
Yes. And is there a link for that, Warren, or is that
Yeah, if you just Google wormhole, that will get you both.
wormhole? Fair enough. So I'm sure people would like to see that. I know I would.
You might want to add Morgan Freeman's name in that, because you could probably get 10 million returns on Wormhole just for Star Trek alone.
It might be porn.
It might be some real bad porn.
Okay. Are we about there, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think we're
so.
ready to go.
I think that's probably about right. So any last sayings, Warren?
Yeah, I'd say the most important thing is that, women, boys of the future are going to be looking for a different sense of purpose. In the old days, we used to have a career, and that career would last a lifetime. We know enough about technology now to know that careers in the future will not last a lifetime. So the only thing that's going to last a lifetime is being a parent. And if you want to be involved in something creative, nurturing, something at the end of your life you're going to feel like you've really accomplished something, if you want the parts of your genetics and your psyche to be released that produces love and makes life feel meaningful, consider getting involved as a significant, not only as a significant father while working full-time, but consider the possibility of being the primary parent and meeting a woman who is maybe the primary breadwinner. That when we know now that when children have that combination and the mother is a primary breadwinner out of desire as opposed to a primary breadwinner out of resentment, that she married a doctor and then he became an artist and didn't make money, that's usually a primary breadwinner out of resentment. When we know that, that's when the children do extremely well, the father's happy, and the mother is happy if she's happy being a primary breadwinner. The biggest change in two big changes of psyche that is needed in preparation for the next generation: the open-mindedness of boys to be significantly involved or the primary parent, and the open-mindedness of women who are very competent and enjoy the workplace to marry a man not who makes even more than she does, but who balances her by being involved with the children so much. And the third that I didn't mention is the importance of parents who have children to support their daughters, to marry men who might want to be fully involved as a parent, rather than saying, oh, you could do better than that. What about that lawyer or that doctor or that that CEO, future CEO that you were dating? Why not marry him instead? And so we really have to open the gender roles much more completely, not just making the world safe for women at work, but also making our children safe for men at home.
Amen. Paul, you got anything to say?
Yeah, I want to echo those sentiments. I want to qualify a couple of things, though, just from my perspective. One, I think what Warren says is absolutely true, that in terms of our future, that there is no doubt that the vastly increased involvement of fathers is what is needed. It is a very important social shift that needs to happen. However, that is not the trend that's happening right now. There is no trend for women to marry down, none at all. There are certainly the traditional standards are holding true there, and men, on the other hand, are trending away from marriage altogether. And there are very, very substantial reasons for why, on men's part, that this is happening. We have, despite our desire to create a better future for children in this culture, which is certainly there, we have a highly corrupt family court system, which is a minefield for men to walk through. I think that's somewhat lessened if men marry women that make more money than them, because courts do tend to go after money. That is one of the primary motivators of this whole corrupt family court system. But the reality of our culture right now is that men are trending away from marriage, and there is good reason for them to be doing that. They're scared of marriage. They're scared of ending up where their fathers have. They're scared of ending up where their friends' fathers and their friends have been. And this is a very real thing. Part of this change that Warren is talking about, which I agree is totally necessary, is that we must correct what's going on in our family courts. We must address a lot of the cultural misandry that allows it to happen, and that we have to be careful that we mix the message that when we're suggesting that young men start to look at finding their value in this, which I think is a great advice, that there needs to be cautionary tales with that, because I don't think it's anyone's intent to send young men into the meat grinder. We've had enough of that, and it is that bad. I mean, when we're not talking about hyperbole here or over dramatization, we're talking about a family court system that has been corrupted to the point that it's like the mafia, where it concerns visitation and child support. They simply don't enforce it. Especially lower income men have almost no chance in those situations of getting any justice, while there is legal assistance provided to women. So we have to continue also to push it for a change in the cultural narrative about these problems. We have to have discussions that involve men and involve their issues, and realistically address this, not just men becoming better fathers, but making it safe to be a father. Absolutely. And there is a big difference between the two, and we can't lose sight of that. And one, just wrapping up here, as always, especially on this subject, I would recommend people get Warren's book, Father and Child Reunion. Absolutely incredible stuff. Read it. Your IQ will jump 10 points from reading the book, and your knowledge about these issues will increase drastically. So that's highly recommended. It's also highly recommended that you become aware about what's going on in our family court system. And one of the ways that you can do that is reading avoicefrommen.com. There's lots of stuff there. Want to remind everybody really quick, a couple of things. We're until the 6th of October. We're in the middle of our quarterly fundraiser. If you can, please, if you enjoy this programming, if you enjoy what you read at A Voice for Men, the conferences, the activism, I'm going to speak at the Kennesaw State University on November 1st. If you like what ABFM is doing in this direction, please come consider giving us a small donation. I know that a lot of the people watching this program are the people that have been affected by the problems that we're trying to address, and that money is tight. So we're in that catch-22 of the most disaffected are the ones we're trying to serve, and we can't beat them over the head for money, but we've got to pay bills in order to do this work. So if you can help us out, I appreciate it. And whether you can help us out with that or not, we'd appreciate if you'd subscribe to this channel, because that helps build our numbers and helps spread the word. If you could follow us on, we're at Patreon, A Voice for Men, Facebook, Twitter. We've got all the social media stuff going. Help spread the word, and we'll be able to continue to bring you more information on mainstream media that you will not be getting in other forms of media, and that's a really important thing. Thanks.
Indeed, and I can't agree more. You know, mainstream media brings you something a bit different. You know, we look at the issues from a male-friendly perspective, like's been done tonight. And a part of what I love about this is that you get very different perspectives, even from within this group. Warren gives you a very powerful look into things from his perspective. Paul gives you a very powerful look into things from his perspective, and both are right on the money. So on that note, maybe we'll say good night. And remember one thing. Remember there's no I in Man Street. We'll see.
Indeed, there's not. Good night, everybody.
A golden coach here.